Michael, as I prepare to speak to you about Michaelmas, I know that there will be a wide spectrum of understandings that you have. Some of you already know quite a lot about Michael, and some of you don't. So I'll try to speak thoughts that will be inspiring for all of us. So Michael is a great spiritual being, and obviously many people don't know, haven't heard who he is, especially modern people. And I'm going to begin by speaking of our necessity to recognize our place in the universe. Every week when we work together, I urge you to cultivate the inner perception that we are spiritual beings. And of course, the unconscious mind just thinks of us as physical beings, but somewhere in our core, we know that we are a truly spiritual presence. The spark of light that you are came into being once long ago in the heart and the mind of the Creator. This being we could call God, the Creator, the great mind source of the universe. We are children created of God, and there are countless other ranks of spiritual beings in the universe. In contrast to most of them, we are just beginners. We are young, we are not yet mature, we don't yet understand very much, we're not very powerful yet. We're full of frailties and mistakes, and we're just learning. And the other spiritual beings, many of them have much higher levels of understanding. I would say they're much closer to God, older than we are. Yet all of us, they and we, are on a long process of evolution. And in this evolution, we are growing to become more angelic, more universal in our consciousness, until we'll finally understand what it means to be a human being, our place in the universe. These other beings that are closer to the source have greater and far-reaching understanding and power, different kinds. They have helped us to create the universe that we live in. So once again, about our immaturity, it's not hard to look that fact in the face, because we know that we are not always awake, even in our daily life. Our mind chatters and we think all kinds of unconscious thoughts. We host unconscious thoughts. We have to work to discipline our thinking to be present, right? And we know that when we fall asleep, we are no longer conscious, or only a vague and inexact consciousness. Even when we meditate, we don't have the clarity of thought to remember who and what we are. And certainly that's the case after we die. We're in another dimension. We're not old enough, wise enough to remember who we are. Or anyhow, for me, that's the case. And here we have the real source of the characterization of this picture, that from old times, that we're like a drop of water that dissolves into the ocean. That is what the immature being is like. But we're on another stage of our evolutionary story now. We're trying to learn what it is not to be a drop of water, but to grow closer and closer towards God. And these higher beings that are with us make that possible. They're our guides. And so how does this work? Through our journey into this point, we came from a time where we were not separated from God before we lived in these bodies. And we, if you can imagine, we resonated with everything that the higher beings were doing, creating. Even like a flower now is resonating with the wind around it, totally in harmony. I'm talking about a time before we even had bodies. We were just formless, but born like tiny drops in the mind of God. But in that state, because we weren't conscious, we could not see clearly. And to develop towards our maturity, which even now we're just working on, we had to be separated from spirit. And for that, I'm going to use words of a picture or a childlike picture. God, if you will, created this world in order that we would have a playground, a laboratory, a home whereby we could mature. And this home gradually became hardened, became solidified, became what we call the finished work, the wrought work, the hammered and chiseled work of the Creator. And that's where we live. And in this world, we're separated from direct vision of God, at least at this point in our earth. And it reminds me very much of that verse in Corinthians in the Bible that says, "Now I see through a mirror dimly, but then face to face." So right now, when I look at the world in my modern 20th century consciousness, it's probably been this way for a few centuries, 1,000 years. We're living in a time where we are more and more enchanted into believing that this sense world is the only reality. And in a way it is. I'm not talking about pretending that this world isn't tangible and gritty and solid. Of course it is. But hiding behind or within everything in the world is the spirit. And our path now is to learn not just to see the surface of things, which works quite well according to the laws of physics. It's all true. And through that, we trained our scientific thinking. It's all true. But our task now is to look deeper and see the spiritual world that is shining through everything that we look at. The spiritual world that has made the plants, see how it operates, watch how it grows, watch how it metamorphoses, so that we sense the activity behind the phenomenon. I like to say that God has clothed himself or herself into these fabulous colors and fragrances and tastes. God is wearing all the clothes of the sense world. They are to be loved and treasured and taken good care of. And yet we have a tendency to use and abuse them. And that's part of this journey that we're on. So this journey through the sense world comes with its own problems. Because we're separate, we lose track of what's essential in life. We face the dilemma of believing that this material world is all that there is. And that brings with it our need to grab onto the sense world so that we can feel a reality. And this brings with it the dilemma of egotism and selfishness. And we feel this frailty of our inner selves, still so young, still so immature. And so we cling for ways to feel ourselves more strongly. And we find that in our comforts, also in our possessions, in our striving for fame and power, and all the things where we're looking in the wrong direction. And it doesn't need to be that way, does it? Because what's really important is our own core self. So what does all of this have to do with Michaelmas, with Michael, this great spiritual being whom we're thinking of at this season? As I said, there are countless beings in creation who exist in the non-physical realities. We can sense them in meditative states if we practice learning how to be sensitive to their presence. In fact, they're so close to us that in meditative states, even if we imagine that we're experiencing God, we're actually probably experiencing one of these other beings that are on this huge spectrum, like a rainbow spectrum between us and God. So in Western terminology, we're familiar with the term of angels. And those are spiritual beings that are quite close to us. In fact, there's a reality to this assertion that we each have our guardian angel who is with us and watching over our destinies over long, long periods of time. And we might be familiar with the word archangel, and there's Elohim, and the seraphim and the cherubim. But these are all names for beings with different levels of consciousness and different levels of power and grandeur and wisdom. They've all played a different role in the creation as they are on their own journeys of evolution. Now, the being that I'm speaking of here, Michael, is an archangel. So this is the being who's a second up from us. So humans, angels, archangels. And Michael is one of 7 archangels that rule the different ages and times of creation, of earth life. And so there are 7 archangels that are deeply connected with watching human culture. And they alternate in their time of their so-called regency. And in using that language, this is the age of Michael that lasts for some 320 years. And we're living in an age that bears his signature. So we'll talk about that. But I also want to say he's one of the 4 archangels that rule the seasons of the year. Gabriel, the angel of the Annunciation, is known as the Archangel of Christmas. Raphael, the Archangel of Healing, is the Archangel of Spring. Uriel, the earnest one, is of midsummer. And Michael is the Archangel of this season, of autumn. And what is autumn? The time of dying away. So to introduce him to you, let me tell you a short story. And let's look back into first of all, the origin of myths, so that the story has even a better place in this talk. That back at the beginning of Earth time, before we were scientists in the way that we are now, before we had test tubes and machines and electron microscopes and mathematics and all that, before that kind of cognitive analytic thinking, we perceived a magical world, even as children do now. We perceived as if everything was in a process of growth and becoming. And we attributed that to the spiritual beings who had created the world. And all of the legends point to the fact that we have to imagine these ancient beings were actually seeing spiritual beings in the stars, in the signs of the zodiac, in the planets. Think of the Greek gods and the Mayan gods who are all relating and living out their dramas in human life or on the earth. And the great mythologies of the Norse myths, even the ancient stories of Adam and Eve, they all tell the stories of creation in a kind of pictorial form. And so we can look also for stories of Michael in the past, and we discover that one of the most ancient versions or depictions of Michael comes from the Chaldean age. And that was about 5,000 years ago when Abraham, the father of the Jewish people, was learning from the spiritual teachers in the Chaldean area. And he learned of the spiritual being known as Sophia, who came to be known as Sophia. And the story says, in those ancient days, sleeping and waking were closely interwoven. Waking was called Apsu, and sleeping was called Tiamat. And Tiamat and Apsu alternated in time. As the story tells, as the world grew, people were no longer able to experience Apsu and Tiamat directly, and especially the realm of night, the realm of darkness, became an experience of threatening energy because people couldn't see beyond the appearance of darkness to spiritual beings anymore. They were afraid of it, and they experienced lesser beings, demonic beings. And it was from these people, the Chaldeans, that they said Tiamat, or darkness, is filled with the forces of the dragon. Now, in time, a great being entered the world. And this being was called Ea, or Ea. And this being Ea was the source of all wisdom. And this being is closely related to the being that we now know as Sophia, the goddess of wisdom. And this being watched over all of these creative beings in Apsu and Tiamat. But she was threatened by the dragon, and she was concerned about the dragon. And so she gave birth to a son, and her firstborn son was called Marduk. And Marduk is the same being whom we call Michael now. It's the same name. Marduk, the firstborn son of Sophia, the goddess of wisdom, was sent into the darkness to protect the people and keep the dragon at bay. Now, we hear many, many versions of that story in course of times. We hear many stories about how the human being was born. Stories of the Queen of Heaven, who stands on the sickle moon. She has a heart, the sun. She has a crown of stars on her head, and she's getting ready to give birth to a child. And there is a dragon who is threatening her. This is a story from the Apocalypse. The dragon wants to steal her firstborn child. And so Sophia has to run. That firstborn child is humanity. And a great warrior saves this child, and she, Sophia, is banished or has to go and hide on the earth, which reminds us also of the story of Isis in the Greek Egyptian mythology. So who is this Michael? Firstborn of Sophia, not the same as the child of the goddess in heaven, different, but this firstborn warrior who has to fight the dragon. And we recognize that he has made a vow to always be faithful to the source of wisdom in the spiritual world. And when Rudolf Steiner talks about Michael, he makes that point very clearly. Michael has vowed that forever he will keep the creative world in right relationship to its source, to the creative being, to wisdom. And so for that reason, he is always called the guardian of intelligence. And in that sense, we have to understand intelligence and wisdom are very closely related. Cosmic intelligence, the understanding of the world, the understanding of source. And Michael vows that he will always make sure that wisdom does not become purely mechanical, does not become cold, does not become rigid, but is always suffused with reverence and with love. And then Rudolf Steiner, in that same talk, he gives a very sobering thought and says, if there's a being of a similar degree of rank, like as an archangel, who also understands this intelligence as much as Michael does, and who doesn't have this selfless commitment to the source, he can try to steal all of the wisdom of the universe and try to make an independent kingdom out of cosmic intelligence. That would be the intelligence that is mechanical, loveless, robotic. And then Rudolf Steiner says, and such a being exists. And he is one of the faces of evil that we're struggling with in our time. Nonetheless, he says, in every case, we cannot turn away from what this being, whom Rudolf Steiner names with the old Arabic name Ahriman, whom we can't turn away from the fact that we humans are born out of this intelligence, and we want, through our commitment, our love of spirit, we want to stay in relationship in all of our thinking, in all of our doing, to Sophia, to the light, to God. And so we are kind of right on the playground, or on the stage, the drama, where this wrestling over cosmic intelligence is happening. Do we prefer power, money, love, fame, fortune, artificial intelligence? Or can we find a way to order our priorities so that we are really working out of our source and choosing a path of love right through the middle of what we're going through right now? Let's turn to another picture of Michael, the eternal picture. Michael has always been portrayed in legends as the one who fights the dragon. And we have all these pictures in the Middle Ages. We've all seen statues and paintings of this great warrior who's fighting the dragon. He stands ferociously above him with a sword thrust down towards the dragon, keeping him under his feet. And Michael doesn't look at the dragon, but he looks towards the future. So what is the dragon doing in these stories? In so many of the myths and legends, the dragon is trying to steal the princess. And who is that? So this speaks so many volumes to us. The princess, this female energy, is the human soul that we all have. Something pure, something infinitely precious. Whether we're embodied in a male or a female body, we all have this precious core. And the dragon is circling and circling and trying to take our godliness and make it into a lifeless, rigid thing. And whatever you can make of the mythology, we all know that we're living in this dynamic where we're fighting all the time in our soul with the dragon-like forces that live in us. True. We have created, we are living in a world right now where we see so-called dragon forces all around us. And true, we have made them all, or we have put them out there, created them in the world around us as manifestations of our own inner struggle. So what we're doing to the climate happens because we forgot to love the world. And what we're doing with this culture of lies and hate and not understanding one another happens because of what we're doing with our soul. So we can say that these dragon forces live inside us, accosting, circling this infinitely pure core that we are, trying to kidnap her. And this is the hallmark of what our human struggle towards freedom is. Can we make the right choices in these times? And in that sense, Michael is the standard bearer for the journey that we're on. Because Michael is an actual spiritual presence, not just an abstract painting or a statue, but he is a spiritual being, even as the guardian angel is a spiritual being, who wants to help us only if we ask for help, who wants to help us to find the way to look into the sense world and recognize that it is living and not just a mechanical world. To recognize the true relationship of this entire world of the senses to the source, so that we recognize in all ways, at all times, we're living in the spiritual world, even when we're in the physical world. This physical world and the spiritual world aren't different. They just have different manifestations. And so as we live in this world, what are our choices going to be? So in ancient times, the ancient pictures all show Michael fighting the dragon, putting his sword out. But Rudolf Steiner makes one contemporary new characterization of Michael and says, in our present days, he's changing his gesture. He knows that we humans have to learn how to think. We're on this path, which is our path towards human freedom. But Michael is not just concerned with the dragon now. He is also saying to us, come this way, follow me. Let me show you. Learn how to think. Learn how to pay attention to your core. I'm going to lead you to a true understanding of the spirit, to a true understanding of the archetypal being, prototype, power, being of humanity, the cosmic Christ. Follow me. I will lead you there. In the sense that if we follow a path of Michael's values and virtues, we will be able to find our way into our future. Otherwise, we're turning it over into this machine that is looking for us, or that the world could become if we're not careful. So Michael, as I said, he's the archangel of the autumn. And in a way, we can say this is the autumn of humanity. Maybe one of many autumns that recur, but this is an autumnal time in humanity, including the COVID, including our quarantines, including the artificial intelligences that are surrounding us on all sides, including this whole mechanistic worldview, including a whole rising, dangerous culture of fear and doubt and hate and lies. It feels in some ways that the noose is tightening, and yet it doesn't have to be that way. And there are so many ways through meditation, through our inner work, that we can find our way through this. And that includes this path of Goethean observation, learning to look at the world not in a mystical way, not in a delusional way, but with clear observation. See how the world is talking to us about God. Really look at the world. Watch the laws of life. Watch the laws of spirit in the world. Develop our minds so that we're not just passively taking in the world. Let the world reveal to us what it is. And having said all that, I know the path of anthroposophy, spiritual science, is a very powerful tool to help us to think thoughts of spirit. There's nothing compelling, as you know, if you've read any work by Rudolf Steiner. It's all hard work and training our consciousness, our minds, but it's an excellent path for learning how to take hold of our consciousness processes. And in the heart of all that, and here comes my own plug for Eurythmy, in the heart of all that, through Eurythmy, we have an invaluable tool for making this spiritual perception and experience come alive. Because through Eurythmy, we can really feel, I am spirit in the body. And in moving in Eurythmy, I can experience how the creative world word, the logos, manifests in my body, in my organs, in my bones, in my blood, how I move. I can learn to recognize the correspondences between myself and the world of nature, how the dandelions have something to do with my metabolism, and so on, how iron has to do with my blood forces. All of these things I can learn to deepen through Eurythmy, so I know that A is the same power as the power that is living in iron, for instance, the power in the blood. So in my experience, anthroposophy is so powerful, and it has helped immensely through a personal practice of Eurythmy. Anthroposophy comes alive through Eurythmy. And perhaps some of you know when Rudolf Steiner was giving lectures after he had discovered Eurythmy, he always asked Eurythmy performances to take place before his lectures, because he said, if you watch Eurythmy, you'll be able to understand what I'm talking about. So I find that very interesting. All right, dear friends, with that, I'm going to maybe just open up for a moment, but I think we are already over time. So I will check the chats, but for those of you who feel that it's time for you to go and to your day, go ahead and leave. I'll stay for a few more minutes and look at the chat. Many blessings to all of you, and I so deeply affirm for you that you are a child of God, and we can get through this. And all of these struggles that we're going through are hard on our souls, but they also really give us an opportunity to grow and to wake up and take our next steps in evolution, which is a long, long story, and we're still just at the beginning of it. Thank you.